Part 46. The Prince is Very Fierce. Author, Guangguang Zi. Chapter 451. It's on fire. Ah! The huge water fort was filled with panicked cries, flames and smoke rose up and rolled up the snow, and bandits running like headless flies could be seen everywhere between the messy buildings. Most of the people in Hongshan Water Fort were refugees who had just joined the fort and had little combat experience. They were completely powerless to deal with enemies they couldn't even find. Seeing the white shadow rampaging in the water fort, the number of dead and tragic bodies increased, and the few archers were killed in the dark. Facing the fear of the unknown, they fell into panic in just a moment, scrambling to flee everywhere, and then affected other people who were not clear about the situation, thinking that the soldiers had broken through the fort, and the entire Hongshan water fort became a mess. There were more than 300 elites in the water fort, gathered by people from the rivers and lakes, with experience and knowledge far exceeding the newcomers. When they found that they couldn't find the enemy, they all shrank outside the central meeting hall to seek the protection of the village owner Sun Qian. Brother! Brother! Quartz's mouth was bloodshot, and he ran out of the meeting hall with a long-handled copper hammer, still with a bit of fear on his face. Ma Sihu had already arrived at the meeting hall, and when he saw his brother was injured, he hurried forward to support him. What's going on? Did the soldiers break in? Quartz was panting heavily, waving his hands and said, "It's not the soldiers, I don't know how many people came, they are really powerful, they use the Liuhe gun, I'm afraid it's Xuechenzi." Sun Qian stood on the steps with a knife in his hand, and was ordering his men to gather a group of scattered minions. Hearing this, his brows frowned. "Xuechenzi and I have no grudges, why did he come to fight me?" Quartz didn't have time to answer, and a scream came from the small square full of water bandits. Amid the sound of broken bricks and tiles, a water bandit broke through the roof outside the wall, turned several circles in the air and fell in front of the meeting hall, breaking his bones on the spot and no sound. The faces of the hundreds of minions who had gathered changed drastically. They pointed their weapons in the direction of the wall. This time, they finally saw the elusive figure. From the big hole in the roof that was broken by the minions, a man in a white robe soared into the sky, holding a long spear and landing steadily on the square. There was no blood on his body, but after rushing around in the village for so long, some dust was stained on his white robe, and there were a few strands of sweat on his forehead. After landing, he breathed a sigh of relief. Finally found it? Sun Qian was like facing a great enemy. He slowly retreated with many water bandits, looking at the wall in front, waiting for a large number of enemies to appear. It was a pity that after waiting for a long time, no figure appeared behind the wall. Su Buling wiped the sweat from his forehead, looked back in the direction of everyone's gaze, and then turned back to look at Sun Qian, who was standing with a knife. "Are you Sun Qian?" The bandits in the square were silent, and everyone looked around, as if they were afraid of being ambushed. There were also bandits who ran over from behind, and after finding the man in white standing in the square, they ran out as if they had seen a ghost. Sun Qian was familiar with the situation of the water stronghold, and he could tell from the sound that there were no large number of ambushed enemies around. He focused his eyes on Su Buling. "You alone?" Su Buling pointed his long spear at the ground and nodded slightly. "Is it not enough?" Sun Qian held the knife with a gloomy face. After glancing at the fire rising in the water stronghold, he said coldly, "If you have the guts, come together and skin him alive." After Shi Ying and Ma Sihu confirmed that there was only one person, they showed some shock in their eyes. After all, a single-handed person who could stir up 1,000-man water stronghold must be a rare master in the world. However, the hundreds of pirates present were all elite warriors who were willing to fight even if a god came. Shi Ying was caught off guard and suffered a great loss. At this time, a fierce light flashed in his eyes and he roared, "Kill! Kill!" The pirates were all brave. They would not hesitate in the situation of bullying the minority with the majority. They rushed to Su Buling in a swarm. Ma Sihu was already irritable, and he had been humiliated for a few days. He was furious and rushed forward with a machete in hand. Shi Ying had just seen Su Buling's skills and was injured. He was a step slower at this time. Su Buling saw this and shook the spear with one hand, making a pop sound. Then he stomped his feet on the stone bricks on the ground. The whole person rushed out like an arrow from a string. His hands reached the end of the long spear and he directly swung it in a circle to sweep the pirates who were rushing towards him. The bricks exploded, and the cold light was like snow. Many bandits were startled by the terrifying momentum. Before they could see the situation clearly, they heard a muffled sound of bang. Su Buling held the horse spear with both hands, and swept it with inhuman strength, hitting the three minions who rushed over. With a muffled sound of bang, the three bandits who were still rushing forward flew backwards and hit their companions behind them. Their chests sank, and they could hardly stand up after landing. Su Buling waved the long spear, but it was impossible to break the water. In a flash, he knocked out 7 or 8 people, and formed a vacuum zone of 2 meters around him. Ma Sihu counterattacked very quickly. When Su Buling swept over, he blocked the spear tip with his sword across his chest. The huge force made his tiger's mouth numb and he could hardly hold the handle of the sword. His eyes showed horror. "Die for me." Shi Ying was short and strong, holding a copper hammer and striding forward like a battering ram, making the ground thump loudly. He supported Su Buling and swept out with a spear, but before he could finish his move, he swung the long-handled copper hammer and smashed it into Su Buling's chest and abdomen. The copper hammer rolled up a large piece of flying snow, and the force was so great that even stone could be broken into pieces if it was hit. Su Buling was a man after all, not made of iron and steel. Seeing this, he stopped his move and held the long spear across his chest. The next moment, the copper hammer hit the snow-white spear shaft, and the fine spear shaft was smashed into an arc. The whole person was also smashed away by the force of a bull. The most taboo for martial artists is to leave their feet off the ground. As long as they are in the air, even gods can't dodge. Seeing this, Ma Sihu stepped forward again without hesitation. Sun Qian, who was standing behind, also had a cold look in his eyes. He dodged and moved quickly, and his speed was the same as Su Buling, who flew out. Amid the roar, the wolf-like water bandits rushed towards Su Buling, who flew backwards with a killing force. In this case, if he didn't keep his balance after landing, he would be hacked to pieces the next moment. What no one expected was that Su Buling didn't even land on the ground. He was hit by Shi Ying's hammer and stepped on the wall behind him. His knees were slightly bent, and then he bounced violently. A pit appeared where his feet stepped, and the whole wall shook and was about to fall. Su Buling rushed back at a speed several times faster than when he flew out. The long spear in his hand danced quickly. The 2-foot-long spear tip made a terrifying sound of breaking wind and drew an arc in the windy and snowy night. Shua! Everyone saw a flash of cold light. Ma Sihu, who was in the front, raised his puteo to block, but it was still split in two. He fell to the ground and broke his internal organs. The puteo in his hand was useless and could not block for a moment. After chopping Ma Sihu to death, the long spear did not stop, and swept to death several bandits next to him. Su Buling also rushed to the center of the crowd. Sun Qian realized that something was wrong, turned his body and slid on the ground, and the knife in his hand swiftly chopped at Su Buling's legs. When Shi Ying saw his brother being torn apart, his tiger eyes instantly turned red. He held a heavy hammer and cooperated with Sun Qian to smash Su Buling's upper body again. The other bandits were shocked and retreated in horror, as if they were doubting whether the man in white was human. Su Buling did not hold back at all. He swung the spear around his body with both hands. Seeing the blade slashing at his legs, he stomped his boots on the ground again, and flew into the sky to avoid the heavy hammer and long sword. Then he held the horse spear with both hands and smashed it down with the force of splitting the mountain. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 452. Essay. Changsha whistled in the air. Sun Qian slashed the air with his sword and felt his hair stand on end. He flipped the sword and plunged it directly into the ground. He suddenly pulled himself back with force. The next moment, there was a loud noise and flying debris nearby. Stone. After Quartz swung the heavy hammer into the air, it was too late to stop and retreat. She immediately let go of the hammer handle and tried to dodge, but unfortunately she was still a step too late. The long spear in Su Buling's hand collapsed into a full moon, falling from the sky and splitting Quartz's head with inhuman means. Who can stop me? Amidst the violent roar, the 2-foot sharp blade penetrated Quartz's skull, like a hob driving through butter. It passed by without any stagnation until it struck the stone tiles on the ground, causing the bluestone floor tiles to explode. There are many people in the world who can use a knife to cut people horizontally, but to split the short and stocky quartz into 2 pieces vertically can only be described as terrifying. Sun Qian and the many water bandits were so frightened that they lost their wits. Without any fighting spirit left, they even knelt and crawled back. The 2-part quartz fell to the ground, and the flying copper hammer hit the wall, causing the already loose wall to collapse immediately. Amidst the rumbling, Su Buling held the dragon-patterned spear in one hand and strode towards the frightened water bandits, his eyes as cold as the 9 nether Yama knocking on the door in the middle of the night. Many water bandits were trembling, not knowing how to respond. Master Su. Maybe it's the road of heaven and earth. Just when Sun Qian and the water bandits were almost paralyzed with fear, a woman's cry suddenly came from behind the wall. Su Buletinling paused and looked back. The 2 women, Chu Chu and Juju, were unharmed and were looking at him with pale faces. Zhongli Chuchu had seen the appearance of Su Buling Wushuan killer god in Black City, and seeing him again was still shocked beyond words. When Zhongli Juju saw Su Buling going all out for the first time, the shock in his eyes was much greater. The name Dao Qinkui has long been spread throughout the world, but in Zhongli Juju's heart, he is at most a very strong young man, at most he is more handsome than other warriors, and overall he is still a human being. But the guy she saw now was too modest to describe him as a human. She believed him even if he said he was the reincarnation of the god of death. Su Buling found the master and apprentice, and naturally breathed a sigh of relief. He put away his long hair, turned around and showed a slight smile. Miss Chuchu, why are you 2 going to the bandits' den for nothing? Do you know how worried I am? How worried? Zhongli Juju's face was a little reserved, as if Su Buling had gone deep into Longtan in the Black City just to return her a favor, and now he was alone in taking risks to create a tiger's den, all for her. Thinking of this, Zhongli Chuchu's eyes were a little confused and he whispered. Mr. Su, why are you here? Zhongli Juju was a little embarrassed, but it was heartwarming to see Su Buling running over to save his apprentice. As an elder, he didn't interrupt and smiled slightly. Su Buling felt a lot more at ease when he saw Zhongli Chuchu. He walked past the collapsed wall with a long stick in his hand and chuckled. As long as you are fine, let's go, we have to rush back to Jinling. Let's go. When the water bandits huddled together heard this, they all looked shocked and confused. The evil spirit came in and killed so many people just to find these 2 bitches. Just look for someone, what does that have to do with us? Come and leave at will, do you think Hongshan Water Village is your home? Zhongli Chuchu was also a little surprised. He glanced at the water bandits in the square with complicated expressions. Then what do they do? Sun Qian's expression froze, and he stepped back a few steps with the long knife in hand, not even daring to say anything. The other water bandits looked horrified and wanted to scold Zhongli and Chu Chu for talking too much, but they didn't dare to speak out. Su Buling was not a true god. He fought rampantly in the bandit village for a long time. In order to frighten the water bandits, he killed 4 horses and 4 tigers. Shi Ying used all his strength. He was not out of strength at this time, but he was also very tired. He could not really fight with all his strength. Hundreds of people were killed. He looked back and said coldly, "I'll give you a chance to leave on your own. If the water village is still there when you come back, I won't mind giving you a ride." Sun Qian seemed to have been pardoned, but he didn't care about the blood feud between his brothers. He put away his sword and raised his hand, "Thank you, young hero, for not killing." Then he moved to the side road with some of his cronies, his eyes still fixed on Su Buling. With the nightingale watching in the dark, Su Buling was too lazy to pay attention to the crowd of miscellaneous fish. He walked up to Zhongli Chuchu, raised his hand and took off the jade pendant from her waist, and said apologetically, "I will use the jade pendant for 2 days and return it to you when I return from Hangzhou." Zhongli Chuchu's eyes avoided contact with Su Buling. After scanning the corpses around him, he turned and walked towards the exit, saying softly, "Young master, just take it. It belongs to you. There's no reason to get something back if you give it away. It's just a borrowed thing." Su Buling put the jade pendant into his arms and looked at Zhongli Juju next to him. If it weren't for Zhongli Juju, Master Bai would still be coy and timid now. How could he be allowed to eat the white steamed buns? Su Buling still had a good impression of this unintentional matchmaker and said with a smile, "Miss Juju, last time Master was angry and kicked you away, so don't worry." Zhongli Juju pretended to be a dignified elder and said softly, "Young Master Su, you don't have to be polite. Ning, you and I have been fighting together for many years and we have long been used to it." Su Buling had seen Zhongli Juju's true face, and he no longer believed in her pretending to be a fairy. He chuckled and said, "I heard rumors in the world that Miss Juju did something big in Hongshan Water Village a few days ago. She gave aphrodisiacs to hundreds of men. This method is really amazing." When Zhongli Chuchu heard this, she suddenly showed some embarrassment in her eyes, and secretly glared at her master. Zhongli Juju was thick-skinned and didn't care. She chuckled implicitly, "Hongshan Lake is plagued by bandits, which has caused the people around it to live in misery. Chuchu and I wanted to get rid of the harm for the people, accidentally gave the wrong medicine." "Really?" Su Buling didn't say it, and took the 2 charming women out of the water fortress where corpses were everywhere. After getting away from the water bandits, he raised his hand and called Nightingale out. Nightingale ran out from the dark with a longbow, her eyes full of admiring little stars. She took the long spear very obediently, found a boat from the lakeside, and the 4 of them went to the other side of the lake to leave Hongshan Water Fort. After killing no less than 100 people in a battle, Su Buling was indeed a little tired. He didn't say much while sitting on the boat, closing his eyes and concentrating on regulating his breath. Zhongli Juju never gave up the idea of taking Su Buling as his apprentice. She sat beside Su Buling very attentively on the boat and massaged his arms to relieve the muscle fatigue after intense exercise. Zhongli Chuchu met Su Buling again. She had a lot to say, but she couldn't say it when they met. She didn't know what attitude to maintain when communicating with Su Buling. After holding it in for a long time, she finally ran to row with Nightingale. The 4 of them came to the small dock on the opposite bank. The collapsed shed was still burning, emitting the smell of burnt corpses. There were many boats parked on the shore, which should be left by the people who were scared away in the water fort. Su Buling jumped off the boat and whistled, slowing down the chasing horse. He was secretly thinking about who should ride with the master and apprentice, and whether to sit with Juju to continue to tease Miss Chuchu. Unexpectedly, before the sound of horse hooves approached, a tower-like man walked out from the shadow of the woods. He was wearing a black martial arts uniform that swayed gently in the wind and snow. He held a shiny iron spear in his hand. His eyes were calm, but they were also sharp. Thanks to Tingmi and Kik for the reward. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 453. The wind and snow were bleak, the sky was dark and the ground was white. The cold wind blew up the snow and sand on the shore of Hongshan Lake, the burning fire of the broken walls and ruins turned the snow into a dark red, and the smell of burnt corpses filled the air. In the dense forest covered with dry grass, the wild Taoist Wu Yu was wrapped in a nightgown, his long sword painted black, and he was motionless on a pine tree that was as thick as a man's embrace, staring at the boat slowly approaching the shore in the distance, his deep pupils showing a bit of viciousness. When facing an unbeatable opponent in the martial arts world, the best way is to kill someone with a borrowed knife. After persuading Xueqinzi, Wu Yu rushed back to Jinling with his extraordinary lightness skills. After discovering that Su Buling was coming towards Hongshan Lake, he turned back on the road and led Xueqinzi here. Wu Yu knew very well how good Su Buling was. Even when he was infected with the dragon-locking goo, he could suppress his two brothers. When he was in full victory, he had no chance at all. The only top masters who could deal with Su Buling were the contemporary Wu Kuei and a few rare top masters. Xueqinzi is not Tang Xiao, the shame of Wu Kuei. He is a figure on par with Sword Saint Zulu and Knife Master Situ Yuejin. He has been invincible for nearly 40 years with a Liuhe spear. He was already a world-famous master in the era of the old Sword Saint Zhu Zhoushan. Even though he is nearly 60 years old, he can still be ranked in the top 10 in the world. As the saying goes, fists are afraid of young people, and sticks are afraid of old wolves. After a lifetime of polishing, the fighting power of the gun god Xueqinzi is only stronger than when he was young, and it is enough to deal with the fledgling Su Buling. It may be a godsend. Xueqinzi just arrived here and met Su Buling, who had just experienced a big battle. Wu Yu saw Su Buling sitting cross-legged on the boat to adjust, and knew that he must have consumed a lot of physical strength just now. At this time, meeting Xueqinzi, even a serious Ten Wu Kuei would have little chance of winning, not to mention a Qing Kuei. For this reason, Wu Yu was a little worried. If Su Buling saw that the situation was not good and directly handed over the jade, Xueqinzi would definitely not do it again. He followed secretly, planning to let Xueqinzi and Su Buling fight each other to a draw, and then use his extraordinary lightness skills to find an opportunity to strike a fatal blow. Now Su Buling was just tired and not injured, so he definitely didn't want to take risks. In the night, Wu Yu stared at the small fishing boat that was docked, and Xueqinzi, who had been waiting for a long time, also came out from the darkness. "Young master, be careful." Beside the burning ruins, Master Zhongli and his apprentice were looking at Su Buling with their own thoughts. Nightingale, who was born cautious, found a tall black shadow standing in the dark of the road. Her eyes swept over the bright silver spear, and her little face changed a little. She pressed the sword at her waist. "Chihukixing, it's Xueqinzi from Liuhemen." Su Buling had already noticed the figure in the dark, but he didn't recognize who it was. He only felt that the imposing aura was very oppressive. This feeling had been seen in Zulu and Eunuchia. It was a sense of crisis that was instinctively generated when it could threaten his own safety. Hearing Nightingale calling out the opponent's name with the weapon, Su Buling frowned slightly. He held the dragon-patterned long spear Xueqinzi's name. Of course, he knew that he was one of the current top 10 martial arts champions, a genuine top 10 in the world, and he had been famous for many years. Even the spear technique he used came from the Xue family's Liuhe spear, and the killer move that Zulu taught Manzi also came from the Zhongping spear in Xueqinzi's spear technique. From this point alone, we can see how high Xueqinzi's martial arts attainments are. From childhood to adulthood, whether before or after coming here, Su Buling has only encountered the most powerful opponents, the secret guard Lao Yi and the ghost lady. Lao Yi's letting him off at Wang Jiangtai doesn't count. The ghost lady had retired for many years due to an old injury before, but she was still able to beat him and Neng Yuhi in cold sweats. It is conceivable how strong the real top 10 martial arts champions are. If it were any other time, Su Buling would have a good chance of defeating the current martial arts champion if he was well fed and in excellent condition. However, he had just fought in the water stronghold for a long time, and it was impossible for him to recover so quickly from physical exhaustion and muscle fatigue. In a master-level fight, life and death are often determined by subtle details. Su Buling's combat experience is definitely not as rich as Xueqinzi, who has been in the martial arts world for a lifetime. If he suffers from a physical disadvantage again, he is not sure whether he can win. Zhongli Jiju and Zhongli Chuchu, the master and apprentice, changed their expressions when they heard Xueqinzi's name. They took a few steps back and hid behind Su Buling, with their hands on the poison bottle on their waists and their eyes alert. If Su Buling was unsure, then Nightingale and Zhongli were facing a formidable enemy. A great reputation is not in vain. A martial arts champion must be the top master of an era. Even Teng Jiao could easily beat 3 Zhangxiangs. Dealing with them, who were at most masters, was like Su Buling dealing with the small fish in the water fort. A tiger entering a flock of sheep can cut grass without any comparison and kill them easily. Zhongli Jiju was good at using poison, but the method of using poison was to control the light in secret, and poison the opponent without him noticing. Now Xueqinzi was right in front of her, and she was probably asking for trouble by throwing poison needles and bottles. The dim firelight illuminated the flying snow, and the small dock by the lake became silent. 5 people stood on both sides, and the atmosphere condensed in the cold wind. Xueqinzi walked out of the darkness with a sharp spear, his face illuminated by a faint light. He was calm and unmoved, and glanced at Nightingale. "Young lady, you have good eyesight. I have something to discuss with your young master. Please step aside." Nightingale held the hilt of the sword, analyzed the situation, and said softly, "Young master, retreat." Su Buling wanted to retreat, but they were all nearby. Even if he could run away, the 3 girls would definitely not be able to run faster than Xueqinzi. At this time, the only role of Nightingale and Zhongli master and apprentice was to block the knife, and they might not be able to block it. If they stayed, they would be a burden. He gently raised his left hand. "You go first, wait at the intersection, and pay attention to safety on the road." Zhongli Chuchu finally reunited with Su Buling and regarded Su Buling as a close friend. How could she leave if there was any difficulty at this time? She said, "Master Su. Walk." Su Buling tilted his head slightly and glared, signaling her not to act like a daughter at this time. Zhongli Chuchu quickly stopped talking, feeling a little at a loss. Zhongli Jiju knew the depth of Jianghu and did not dare to stay around to get in the way. She secretly stuffed a few bottles into Su Buling's belt behind her and pulled Zhongli Chuchu to move to the forest next to her. Nightingale knew her own weight, so after saying "Master, be careful," she followed Master Zhongli and his disciples and slowly evacuated the dock. Tap tap tap. The embroidered shoe stepped on the snow on the ground and drifted away. Su Buling pointed at the ground with a long dragon-patterned spear in one hand, staring at Xueqinzi with a faint smile in his eyes. "Senior Xue is here, what are you doing?" Xueqinzi was extremely tall and stood motionless in the snow, like an iron tower holding up the sky. After glancing at Su Buling a few times, "Don't panic, little friend, I'm just exchanging something with you." His words were calm, and there was no arrogance in his tone. At the level of Wu Kuei, with real combat power, just like Eunuchia and others, there was no need to use words to build momentum. Su Buletinling's long tree stood still in the wind and snow, looking directly into Xueqinzi's eyes. "What to change? You have a few pieces of jade left by Zhojia, which are of great use to me." Come here today to exchange for this knife. I hope I can give up my love to you. Xuechenzi took off the simple long knife stuck across his lower waist and gently threw it away. The long knife slid across the night sky, steadily but silently. It seemed to have little strength. Su Buring raised his hand to grab the scabbard, but there was a muffled sound, and the white robe on his body visibly shook. But that's all. Su Buling caught the long knife with his left hand, his figure was as motionless as a pine tree, and he didn't even move his blade. Yes, it is very valuable to have such a skill at such a young age. Xuechenzi's eyes finally looked a little more serious, and he nodded lightly and praised. Su Buletinling's eyes moved to the long knife in his hand, and he flicked it with his fingers. The blade was half an inch out of the sheath, and the bright light shone in the firelight. Even if Su Buling couldn't recognize the name of this Minghong sword, he still had good eyesight and could tell that the value of the sword was no less than the Zayadan and Shuolonggyan in his hands. There was a bit of surprise in Su Buling's eyes. For a martial artist, no one dislikes swords, wine, beauties, and horses, and he was the same. If people in the world would trade such a rare magical weapon for a few jade pendants, he would definitely accept it, and he might even feel that he was getting a big advantage. But the jade article on his body now is the key point of King Wu's secret plan. Grandpa Fuebao also warned him to take a look at it. The purpose should be to take advantage of the situation and allow King Wu to successfully complete the plan. Su Buling didn't know what King Wu was planning, so he had to go and see the situation and analyze whether it was profitable. Compared with the general trend of the world, a sword is obviously not of enough weight. Moreover, the hairpin was given by Fuebao and the jade pendant was given to Zhongli Chuchu. It was a bit embarrassing to take it back and use it. How could they exchange it with others? The jade has been given away and cannot be exchanged with Senior Shui. Please forgive me. Su Buletin ordered the blade to be sheathed, and he raised his hand and threw the sword back lightly. Xuechenzi frowned slightly, stretched out the sharp spear and stuck it on the flying sword. Without making any sound, he stopped the powerful sword in the air, spun a few times in the air, and inserted it into the snow with a slight clang. A pair of tiger eyes stared at Su Buling. Mr. Su, I will get the jade today. In exchange for this knife, I won't treat you half wrong. Don't be toasted and you will be punished with wine. His tone was obviously a little darker, and the lightness in his eyes turned into a lifelong sharpness, as sharp as the bright silver gun in his hand. Su Buling frowned slightly, raised his cheek slightly, and his eyes showed a bit of unruliness. Relying on the old and selling the old. After a few words, the wind and snow fell silent, leaving only the two opposites. Master Zhongli, his disciples, and Nightingale, who had not gone too far, were all shocked. They didn't expect Su Buling to have such a violent temper. The person opposite him was a top 10 martial artist. Even if he relied on his elders to act like his elders, he would still speak a little tactfully. Zhongli Jiju wanted to dissuade him, but in this situation, her status in the world was not qualified to speak out, so she could only stand in the woods and worry. On the other side, Wu Yu finally breathed a sigh of relief after hearing this sarcasm without mercy. Jianghu people pay attention to seniority. When younger people face respected senior Jianghu people, even if they want to cause trouble, they have to send a greeting card first. This is a sign of respect for their seniors. There are too many examples of Leng Toking being rude. Cao Meng, the Thunder Gongan, went to northern Xinjiang Chenchong in his youth and arrogance. He deserved to have his leg broken because he was being polite, and he deserved to be beaten to death on the spot. This phrase "rely on the old and sell the old," go out, with Xuechenzi's status in the world, if you can pretend that you can't hear him, then your life in the world will be in vain. After hearing the words, Xuechenzi raised the sharp iron gun, his eyes returned to the calmness when he first came, and he stood like a mountain on the snow, and said calmly, "It's easy to break when you are too strong. When I was young and energetic, I suffered losses and lost my memory. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 454. The dim firelight chilled the snowy surface in front of the small dock, and it seemed that even the cold wind had stopped at this moment. Su Buling took a breath, held the spear with both hands and held it horizontally in front of him, with his head, shoulders, feet, and spear flat, using the starting position of the Zhongping spear in the Liuhe spear, which is also the simplest but most difficult killing move in the Liuhe spear. Martial artists all have bad tempers. Xueqinzi has a sense of pride in his heart for being the martial champion, so he didn't say much. He held the spear horizontally in front of his eyes with both hands, and his movements were smooth and steady, as if this posture was the posture he usually maintained, not standing. Pa! In the collapsed wooden shed, the charred bamboo pole exploded with a crisp sound, which was very eye-catching in the night, affecting everyone's mind, and also kicked off the prelude to the martial champion competition. Xueqinzi heard the explosion and glanced at the fire on the side. When his eyes turned back, the young man in white who had just locked onto him had disappeared. 2 deep footprints were left on the ground. The sound had just reached his ears. Bang! The terrifying force shook the snow on the ground, and a hole was directly knocked out of the snowflakes falling from the sky. Xueqinzi's eyes did not move, and the long spear in his hand swept to the left. The fiery red spear tassel was like a ball of flame, drawing a red tail in the air, and the spear made of fine iron was swung to make a whip sound. The next moment, the crisp sound of metal colliding exploded in the night sky, and the sparks burst like a lightning bolt that appeared out of thin air, illuminating the dim snow. Su Buling, who had increased his speed, had veins on his forehead. He stabbed the long spear from the left side. He was still 3 feet away from Xueqinzi, but was swept on the spear pole by a spear that swept through thousands of troops. The unstoppable and brutal force, even if Su Buling had expected it, was beyond his previous cognition. The whole person was hit out directly like a baseball, smashed into the forest behind, and instantly hit several bowl-sized trees. Ah! Xueqinzi roared like a huge bell, and his black clothes burst on the spot, revealing his bronze-colored muscular body. His sturdy body like an iron tower jumped in the air, holding the iron spear in both hands and smashed into the woods with the force of splitting the mountain. Such a horrifying scene shocked Zhongli Jiju and others who were watching, their faces turned pale. They didn't expect that a person could be so powerful. Not to mention a person, even an indestructible city gate would probably be torn into pieces when it met Xueqinzi. It was impossible to imagine how to stop it. Even Wu Yu, who was hiding in the tree, trembled with fear, and silently moved away a little further, not daring to breathe. Su Buling was shot into the woods, and he stopped only after he broke several trees. His white robe was torn by the wood thorns, leaving several blood marks on his skin, but he did not lose his balance and landed steadily on the ground. He held the spear horizontally above his head with both hands, and the huge black shadow had already crushed down like a mountain. Clang! Another thunder-like sound. The spear in Su Buling's hand was bent into an arc, and his arms were like jade pillars that held up the sky, motionless, but the sleeves on his arms were crushed by brute force, and his feet were smashed into the mud, deep into the soil until they stopped at the knees. Get up! Su Buling's face flushed, and the veins on his forehead and the back of his hands twisted and knotted. He shouted angrily, bent his knees slightly, jumped up suddenly, and pulled himself out of the mud, raised his hand and stabbed with a spear. Mud and snow splashed, and Xueqinzi was pushed out by the amazing force of the gun body before he landed. He did a backflip and landed on the ground. When he looked up, the spear tip was already in front of him. He grabbed the top of the spear without thinking. The unstoppable dragon-patterned long spear stopped abruptly in front of Xueqinzi, as if it was stabbed on an iron plate, and it was impossible to move forward even a little bit. Su Buling's steps did not stop because of this. He strode wildly on the mud and stepped on the pits one by one, and stabbed the long spear into Xuechenzi's face. Xuechenzi's right hand was like steel, clamping the spear without moving, but his iron tower-like body was retreating rapidly. His long boots sank into the mud, leaving 2 deep grooves on the ground, and sliding back on the snow like plowing. Ah! This might be the first time Su Buling showed what dragon tendons, tiger bones, and unicorn strength meant. He pushed Xuechenzi, who was twice as big as him, forward with big strides. The spear did not bend at all under the concentrated force, just like a bull's horn holding a huge rock and moving through the woods. The Zhongli master and his apprentice were shocked. No wonder Su Buling let them go first. They were also old hands, but they had never imagined that a person's strength could be so great. All the trees, soil, and rocks around seemed to have become tofu that broke at the touch, and could not form any obstacles. What shocked them even more was that Xuechenzi could actually block this kind of strength. He slid back, but his body was like a statue of a god made of fine iron, without even shaking. The bandits who were dismissed from the Hongshan water village arrived at the small pier. Sun Qian, who was still in shock, had just landed and looked up to see Xuechenzi and Su Buling fighting. He was so frightened that he could not even think of taking advantage of the situation. He jumped into the lake and swam back to the water village. Xuechenzi, who was pushed by the long spear, also showed some astonishment in his eyes. He did not expect Su Buling, who had just experienced a battle, to be able to exert such amazing strength. If he had fought in his prime, he might not be able to beat him. Dong. The terrain in the dense forest was not open. Xuechenzi was soon pushed under a big pine tree with the thickness of 2 arms. His back hit the pine tree, and the trunk shook and the pine needles rustled down, making a crisp sound of wood cracking. Xuechenzi stopped, and with a muffled sigh, he grasped the long spear that was stabbing at him, but the spear tip did not stop completely. Under the huge pressure, it approached his face and pressed Xuechenzi against the tree trunk. Ah, dance god e-book. Su Buling held the end of the spear with both hands and stabbed the long spear with all his strength. His clothes on his back were torn into countless holes by his towering muscles, and beads of sweat rolled down the ground and became white mist. The spear is an extended version of the gun. The iron spear in Xuechenzi's hand has lost its length advantage. In this case, unless the iron spear is thrown out, it will not be able to stab Su Buling. If a warrior loses his weapon, the victory or defeat is basically decided, which is obviously not advisable. Xuechenzi's forehead also had blue veins and beads of sweat rolling down. Seeing the sharp spear tip close to the tip of his nose and about to pierce his flesh and blood, he suddenly turned his head and loosened the spear. The condensed force burst out, and the spear tip brushed past Xuechenzi's side face in the blink of an eye, poured into the pine tree, and pierced through the thick trunk. Xuechenzi took advantage of the short gap when the long spear was stuck, roared, and thrust the spear with both hands directly at Su Buling's chest and abdomen. His cheek was pierced by the spear tip, leaving a hideous bloody wound on his left face, but if this happened, Su Buling would either abandon the spear or lose his life. As long as he lost his weapon, he could not compete with him with his strong physique alone. For a contest of this level, a small injury was nothing. But what Xuechenzi did not expect was that he still underestimated the ferocity of the young man in front of him. Su Buling, who had been beaten to anger, squeezed his physical strength almost crazily. Facing the stabbing iron spear, he did not let go, but jumped up and turned over suddenly. The sharp spear tip narrowly passed under his ribs. He turned the spear with his wrist, and the spear tip that pierced the pine tree turned in the trunk, squeezing a crack in the trunk, and then cut and split the trunk horizontally, forcing Xuechenzi's neck again. The price of this move was obviously very high. The tip of the spear cut through the flesh under the ribs, and the blood seeped out and dyed the white robe red. But this move was also very effective. Xuechenzi stabbed out with the spear and had no time to retract it. He did not expect Su Buling to be so fierce that he dared to use such a trick that would kill him on the spot if he was not careful. The spear tip was already in front of his head. Xuechenzi had been in the martial arts world all his life, and his long years of experience were definitely not for show. He released the iron spear without hesitation and raised his arm to accurately block the top of the spear. Su Buling's strength was much weaker than before after several fights and the long-term charge in front. Xuechenzi was still in peak condition. Although his arm was smashed and there was a slight sound of bone fracture, the spear tip still stopped in front of him. Xuechenzi did not hesitate at all. The moment he blocked the spear tip, he kicked with a whip kick, sweeping Su Buling's chest in the air. With a muffled bang, Su Buling flew to the side and broke several small trees. Ah! Zhongli Chuchu screamed, and saw that Su Buling was a little overwhelmed. She ran up to help, but was stopped by Zhongli Juju. After all, there was no point for them to go up now, and it would distract Su Buling. Wu Yu saw that the battle was getting intense, and both sides were injured after trying their best, so she approached with her extraordinary lightness skills, hoping to take the opportunity to kill Su Buling. But what no one expected was that Su Buling, who was hit hard and flew out, was not stunned. He inserted the long spear into the ground in the air, and the arc formed by the fine spear pole by inertia was like a fully drawn crossbow, which bounced him back directly. Die! Su Buling took advantage of the excellent elasticity of the spear pole to increase his speed to the extreme, and the long spear in his hand made a humming sound like a dragon's roar during the thrust. Xuechenzi kicked out with a whip kick, and just as he caught the iron spear that had not yet fallen to the ground, Su Buling returned to his front. Snap! This time, it was obvious that he could not hide anymore. Xuechenzi forced his iron tower-like body to move away, but the disadvantage of his large body was that he was a large target. He was still pierced through the left shoulder by the sharp spear tip, nailed to the half-pine tree behind him, and directly hit the already shaky and thick tree. This might be the first time in Xuechenzi's life that he had been beaten to such a point. All the reasons and thoughts before coming here had long been thrown out of his mind. Only the desire to survive and the belief in victory of a warrior remained. He growled like a beast, twisted his shoulder forcibly to block the spear tip that pierced into the bone of his shoulder, and raised the spear in his right hand like a steel whip to smash Su Buling's head. Seeing this, Su Buling let go of the spear, and rushed to Xuechenzi like a hungry tiger, and took a hit on his shoulder, and a very savage sticking mountain to fill Xuechenzi's chest. Bang! The iron spear made Su Buling's figure shorter, but failed to stop Su Buling's crazy charge. His shoulder hit Xuechenzi's chest and abdomen, and blood immediately gushed out of Xuechenzi's throat and sprayed on the blood-stained white robe. If it were any other enemy, this close-range attack would definitely smash the opponent's entire chest. It's a pity that Wu Kuei is Wu Kuei, and his physique is much better than that of ordinary people. Su Buling's muscles were obviously weak after a series of hard battles. This unstoppable attack did not shake the iron tower like Xuechenzi. Ah! Xuechenzi's feet were nailed to the spot. He let go of the iron spear, clenched his fists and raised his hands to hit Su Buling's chest with 3 cannon punches, making 3 muffled sounds. However, the feedback made Xuechenzi frightened. The boy in front of him was so strong that he was not like a human being. There was no difference between his punches and hitting the city wall. Su Buling's body swayed a few times, but he didn't fall down. He used all his strength to hit Xuechenzi's chest with the mountain climbing and scouting move of Bajiquan. Bang! Xuechenzi groaned again, and his strong chest sank a little, and there was a muffled sound of bone fracture. Xuechenzi still didn't retreat a single step. His wrinkled tiger eyes showed a crazy look. He shouted angrily, "I want to see how long you can take it." He punched Su Buling's chest twice again, but anyone with a discerning eye could see that Xuechenzi had the upper hand in physical strength, but everything else was in a slump. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 455. Su Buling was not a real god. From the dusk until now, he was panting like an ox, and his arms had begun to twitch slightly. He no longer held the fist hard, and turned his fist into a claw. His fingers were like hooks and he grabbed Xueqinzi's arms along his throat, trying to end this a somewhat scary opponent. It's just that although Xueqinzi was injured, he still had a lifetime of experience. He recognized the crane-catching hand of the eagle grabbing the door, and actually grabbed Su Buling's elbow with his backhand, breaking the killing move. What happened next? A knee hit Su Buling's waist. Bang! A muffled groan appeared in the night. Facing an experienced and dying tiger, Su Buling had no reason to fight. He found that it was difficult to kill Xueqinzi and that if he continued to fight, he would be seriously injured. He made a decisive move and hit Xueqinzi with a headbutt, which turned into a fist. He closed and released his palms and forcefully pushed Xueqinzi out. Xueqinzi was aroused, and when he saw that Su Buling was exhausted, he fell to the ground and prepared to rush over again. But after Su Buling in front pulled away, he reached into his waist with his left hand, took out a small porcelain bottle, flipped his wrist and turned it into a flying knife. Xueqinzi has been in the world of martial arts all his life, and he has seen all kinds of insidious methods. The one that can be thrown at him at this critical moment of life and death will definitely not be a golden sore medicine. Without hesitation, he flipped back and put the toe of his shoe on the flying small porcelain bottle. The soft force stuck to the porcelain bottle, making it difficult to break. He turned around, changed direction, and kicked directly into the woods to the side. The small porcelain bottle turned a corner, but its speed did not change at all. It was nailed to a pine tree and exploded, erupting into a thick black mist that spread several feet away in the night wind. Su Buling's expression changed suddenly. He didn't expect the small bottle to be so powerful. When he saw the poisonous mist drifting over, even Xueqinzi didn't care about it, so he turned around and ran in the opposite direction of the black mist. Lock Dragon Gu. Xueqinzi originally wanted to continue fighting Su Buling to the death, but when he saw the black mist, his expression changed. The old swordsman Zhu Zhoushan died in the hands of this thing. He was also a top martial artist of the older generation. Naturally, he knew what the locking dragon Gu looked like. After discovering that it was the poisonous mist of the locking dragon Gu, he couldn't care less about Su Buling. He rushed out suddenly to avoid the mist blown by the wind. It was windy and snowy at night, and no one knew how far this deadly poisonous mist could drift. Su Buling pulled out the long stick on the ground and ran towards Zhonglijiu. "Good boy, I'll give you the knife." Xueqinzi was covered in blood, and had actually fallen into a situation of inevitable defeat. At this time, he was interrupted by the locking dragon Gu. His fighting spirit retreated and he regained his sanity. He even hugged a fist while running, picked up the iron gun and ran away in another direction. When the two were about to part ways, a scream suddenly rang out in the dark forest. Su Buling looked back, only to see that there was someone hiding near the woods where the battle had just occurred. He was wearing a night jacket and covering himself up tightly. He fled deeper. After running a few steps, he rolled on the ground and tried to shake off the clothes on his body. Black fog. The black mist clung to the clothes like tarsal maggots, leaving a long black trail. Su Buling shuddered. He had suffered losses in the past and felt terrified. He did not dare to rush through the poisonous fog to check. He pulled out the Minghong sword from the dock and ran to the three girls. There was no color on Zhonglijiu's cheeks. At this time, she was still holding onto her master's arm, even breathing cautiously. After all, for warriors of their level, every move just now was a killing move, basically killing them if they touched it. A fight between two people could turn up a whole forest. If she hadn't seen it with her own eyes, she would definitely have thought it's the storyteller talking nonsense. Zhonglijiu's expression was one of disbelief. She could tell that Xuechenzi gave in and ran away. The contemporary Wu Kuei was afraid of being beaten, and the title was naturally given to the newcomer. Her completely new daimyo Wu Kuei was born in the wilderness. She originally thought that Su Buling would have to train for a few more years, she Wu Kuei master. Su Buling walked up to him with a knife and gun. After a fierce battle, his clothes were in tatters and no original shape could be seen. Only rags were left hanging on his body. There was a skin wound under his ribs and he was hit several times in the chest, waist, and abdomen. One knee was black and blue, looking really miserable. He could still hold on during a bloody battle, but after the fight, he no longer had any energy left. He was panting heavily and sweating like rain, and he felt like he was floating when he walked. Seeing the three women standing there stupidly, forgetting to help them, Su Buling didn't want them to worry too much. After thinking about it, he coughed twice and his face turned blue, and he said with frightened eyes, "No, I was poisoned." Zhongli Chuchu finally came to her senses and hurriedly ran to Su Buling, wanting to raise her hand to help, but she didn't know where to start and said nervously, "Mr. Su, are you okay? Is it okay if everything is like this?" Su Buling was speechless, covering his chest and looking at Zhongli Juju who was stunned, gritted his teeth and said, "Miss Juju, I seem to have been infected by your dragon-locking poison." Ah! Zhongli Chuchu understood this time, and immediately panicked. His green eyes were full of anxiety, and he looked at his master without thinking, "Master, please detoxify him quickly." After saying this, he was shocked again. The method was used in my heart, and I felt like the sky was falling in an instant. Is it possible that he wants to be my mistress? Zhongli Juju's expression was stiff. She was far away just now and the sky was dark. She didn't see clearly whether Su Buling was exposed to the poisonous mist. When she saw Su Buling's face, it looked like he was really suffering from the poisonous dragon lock. It's over, it's over." Zhongli Juju's charming face showed panic, she pursed her lips, turned around and wanted to run away. As a result, he was hugged before he even took 2 steps. Zhongli Juju thought Su Buling was holding her, so her face turned pale with fright. She turned around in panic, but it was her apprentice. Zhongli Chuchu hugged his master, his face anxious and pleading, "Master, why are you running? If you run away, he will be dead. Just detoxify him and he will be fine soon." There was no cunning in Zhongli Juju's fox-like eyes, only panic. He pursed his lips and looked at the apprentice who had turned his elbows outward. He didn't say anything for a long time. "Master, he was poisoned. I know he was poisoned." Zhongli Juju struggled for a long time, but still didn't run away. She gritted her teeth and turned around and walked to Su Buling. She raised her hand to grab his arm and feel his pulse. Seeing that his secret was about to be exposed, Su Buling quickly raised his hand and said, "It seems that I feel wrong, it shouldn't be poisoned." Zhongli Juju held Su Buling's wrist and explored it, then her face turned red and she scolded. "Damn boy, you dare to play tricks on me." Zhongli Chuchu's eyes were blank, and after reacting, his face turned cold. "Mr. Su, how could you make such a joke?" Seeing that the girls had recovered, Su Buling laughed twice, held Nightingale's neck to support his body, and pointed at the bruised body. "It's normal to be injured. It's normal to feel wrong. It's not advisable to stay here for a long time. When the water bandits come back, they have to explain everything here. Let's go back first." Zhongli Juju had just taken it seriously, and even considered enduring the humiliation. Now she realized that she was being tricked, and her pretty face turned red with anger, but she couldn't express it clearly. After thinking about it, she gritted her teeth and said, "Promise, if you worship me as your teacher, I will give you medicine for your injuries." Su Buling didn't care at all. He blew a whistle and called the wind-chasing horse that was wandering outside. He took the palace's top wound medicine from his bag and stuffed it into his mouth. He got on the horse and signaled to leave. Nightingale turned on it very wisely. Got his own horse. Zhongli Chuchu's camel was stored in the city. He had just been deceived by Su Buling and almost pushed his master into the fire pit. Feeling a little confused, he lowered his head and climbed onto Nightingale's horse. Hey! Zhongli Juju put her little waist in her hands and looked at the apprentice and future apprentice who had joined forces to bully her. She nodded, okay, I'll count on you. After saying that, she jumped onto the back of Su Buling's horse and sat on Su Buling's horse. From behind, he raised his hand and pushed. Spread your arms to stop the bleeding. Be careful not to lift them if you get tetanus. Su Buling was exhausted a long time ago. With a doctor behind him, he no longer had to worry about it and honestly opened his arms. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 456. The horse galloped across the wilderness, the night wind rolled up the red yarn, dragging a red trail on the snow-covered ground. Zhongli Chuchu sat on the saddle and galloped towards Jinhu County where the camels were stored. The long eyelashes set off the green cat-like eyes, showing a charming charm in the night. The proud figure of the western region woman looked bigger than the slender Nightingale. At this time, she put her hands around Nightingale's waist and her eyes stayed on the tall horse next to her. Su Buling's white robe was tattered and had been torn off long ago, revealing his well-defined upper body in the wind and snow. There were many black and blue places on his body. He looked a little more wild and mighty like a man, but also a little embarrassed, which was very different from the beautiful young man who was as gentle as jade in the past. Seeing this scene, Zhongli Chuchu couldn't help but feel a little guilty. She had originally wanted to let it go and no longer deliberately contact Su Buling. There was nothing wrong with meeting each other in the world and forgetting each other in the world. It was just that when they came to Hongshan Lake a few days ago, the master came up with a bad idea, wanting to see if Su Buling would come to help her after hearing the news. Zhongli Chuchu wanted to refuse, but in the end, she didn't know why, and replied, "It's up to you." She knew the master's temper very well. If she didn't fight for 3 days, she would definitely do something wrong. She knew this, but she didn't firmly oppose it. She followed him stupidly and waited for several days behind Hongshan Water Village. Su Buling did come to save her, but he was injured. Just like he rushed to the Black City Palace without hesitation to make a scene in order to repay her a favor, she just had a little idea, but Su Buling was risking his life. Su Buling didn't mean to blame her, but she blamed herself sincerely in her heart. If she couldn't beat Xuechenzi today, Su Buling might have died here. She really shouldn't have agreed to this trick of testing people. But no matter what, Su Buling came in time when he heard that she was in danger, and Zhongli Chuchu was still very moved. Otherwise, she would not have run to persuade the master to help detoxify Su Buling without hesitation after hearing that Su Buling was poisoned. She was really afraid that such an excellent man would lose his life because of her, and she couldn't owe him this favor. As for the master, Zhongli Chuchu cared about the master who was both a teacher and a mother, and made such a decision without thinking. Maybe she thought that the master would detoxify Su Buling, and he would live a happy life in the future. Su Buling was really a good man. But there was no other reason. Zhongli Chuchu was a little depressed at this time. She secretly looked at the master sitting behind Su Buling, but did not dare to reveal the look in her eyes. In the end, she looked at the mountains on the other side, wondering what she was thinking. Tap tap tap. The wind-chasing horse trotted on the official road. The speed was quite fast but very stable, with only very slight bumps. Zhongli Juju sat with her legs between the saddles, close to Su Buling's waist and back. Because of the riding posture, her aqua blue long skirt had to be pulled up to her waist, revealing two smooth legs like jade. The palace shoes with blue background and white flowers were put on her feet. There were two leather leg rings tied above her knees. A row of small porcelain bottles, silver needles and flying knives were inserted into the leg rings. Just by looking at the color, you can tell that they are poisoned. Zhongli Jiju found the small porcelain bottle on her leg and identified it with the weak light. She was still chattering. Lock dragon goo, well, it's not this, 7-step heartbreak powder, it's not, golden wound medicine. Su Buling opened his arms to reveal the skin wound under his ribs, and his bare chest blocked the cold wind. Riding on the same horse with Zhongli Jiju, they were very close to each other. Behind the saddle was a hot harbor, and the touch was sharp. He could even feel the outline of the camel toe. The last time Su Buling drank with Zhongli Jiju on the boat, he found that Miss Jiju was naked under her collar, but he didn't expect that she was the same under her skirt as Chuchu. They were indeed close master and apprentice, but I don't know if she was wearing safety pants. It's understandable that she is good at using poison and it's hard to hide bottles and jars in thick clothes, but it's hard for Su Buling not to be distracted when his legs were dangling under his nose. After hearing the muttering behind him, his heart sank again. He turned his head and smiled. Miss Jiju, why don't I do it myself? It's pitch black. What if I use the wrong medicine? Zhongli Jiju has been dealing with drugs for many years and can distinguish various drugs with her nose. How could she confuse them? She just wanted to scare Su Buling and avenge the teasing she had just received. Seeing Su Buling turn around, she raised her hand and patted the back of Su Buling's head, pushing his head back. Don't look around, are you afraid that I, your sister, will confuse you? Don't worry, even if I poison you half to death, I can still cure you safely. Poison is more expensive than medicine for wounds. Do you know how much silver the poison mist of the bottle of dragon locking goo can sell for on the black market? Su Buling did not deny this. The dragon locking goo is too overbearing. No matter who or how many people you meet, you can only run away if you throw one on the ground. I dare not say how lethal it is, but the life-saving effect is absolutely first class. If Zhongli Jiju dares to sell it, I am afraid that someone will be willing to pay tens of thousands of taels of silver. Su Buling looked straight ahead and thought for a while, how many dragon locking goo does Miss Jiju have? Zhongli Jiju searched for a long time before taking out a small bottle and said, it should be this. Su Buling's scalp numbed when he heard it. She opened the bottle, smeared the powder on the white cloth, wiped the wounds on her ribs and back, and responded casually. The dragon locking goo is a goo, which means a bug, so there is only one of them. This is my capital in the underworld, so I can't give it to you. It takes 3 years to save up a small bottle of goo poison, and there are only 3 bottles now. Chuchu and I have 1 bottle, and the one I gave you is a gift for entry. You have already used it. When you officially worship me as your master, I will give you another bottle. Su Buling suddenly felt a little painful when he heard this. He thought that with the goo worm, the goo poison would be inexhaustible. It's not that I don't want to take Miss Jiju as my master, but I already have a master. Zhongli Jiju's face suddenly turned ugly when she heard this, and she rubbed the bruise vigorously with medicine. Did Ningyu he tell you not to take me as your master? His Su Buling took a breath, a little annoyed, and slapped her leg with his backhand. Why are you using so much force? I was injured to save you and your master, isn't this repaying kindness with enmity? Zhongli Chuchu heard the slapping and the sound of cold breath, turned around, and saw that the master was threatening and tempting for the matter of taking in a disciple again, and whispered, Master, don't embarrass Mr. Su, he is injured. Zhongli Jiju's leg was slapped, and her face suddenly flushed. It was difficult to say anything when being watched by the apprentice, so she silently pulled her skirt down a little, and used the wound to the medicine was rubbed vigorously on Su Buling's back. What do you mean I'm making things difficult for you? You promised last time and were ready to worship me as your master. If Ningyu hadn't whispered behind your back, whispered in your ear, how could you suddenly regret it? There's no harm in worshipping me as your master. When Su Buling heard this whispering in your ear, he secretly felt that something was wrong. Thinking of the last time Zhongli Jiju was driven off the boat and didn't dare to come back, he thought about it, moved closer, and whispered. Miss Jiju, did my master say something to you? The last time Zhongli Jiju tried, she realized that Ningyu might have some shameful thoughts about his apprentice in his heart. Under the influence of the truth wine, he might have said something out of line to Su Buling. However, based on her understanding of Ningyu, it is absolutely impossible for him to break the secular taboos and develop feelings for his apprentice, so she has been in a suspicious stage. Seeing Su Buling asking about this, Zhongli Jiju rolled her dark eyes, leaned closer and whispered. I tested your master last time, and your master said that he had a man he liked. Oh. Su Buling raised his eyebrows, really? Who is it? Zhongli Jiju saw Su Buling's reaction and felt relieved. It seems that Ningyu just had some crooked thoughts in secret. If the two of them had already had an affair, as Su Buling's apprentice, he would either deny it in a hurry or ask nervously who the man was. It would be impossible to be so calm. Yes, she said that it seemed to be an old acquaintance, not as good looking as you, and not as good at martial arts as you. That's nonsense. There is no one in the world who is better looking and has better martial arts than me. Su Buling listened to Miss Jiju's nonsense and understood that she was testing the relationship between him and Ningyu. If this kind of thing was told to others, the master would definitely not let him touch it, so he acted very naturally, as if blessing his master. Zhongli Jiju secretly observed for a moment, and after finding that Su Buling was not unusual, he could not help but secretly shook his head, thinking that Ningyu was just like that, no different from an ordinary lovelorn, and only secretly had a one-sided love. Since it was only Ningyu who secretly had a one-sided love, he would definitely not say it out loud in this life, and at present, he was still fighting for the apprentice. Zhongli Jiju thought about it, wiped the wound more gently, and chuckled. Mr. Su, I know your master's temper very well. She just stopped you because she hates me. If you really worship me as your master, she won't do anything to you. You know my ability. As long as I am in front of you, the King of Heaven and the old man can't do anything to you. Su Buling actually admired Zhongli Jiju very much, but he dared not disobey his wife's pillow talk, shook his head and sighed. Don't worry, Miss Jiju, I will persuade the master after I go back, and sooner or later Miss Jiju will have a place among the guests of the palace. This is just a big deal. Zhongli Jiju was not stupid. Seeing Su Buling trying to avoid becoming his disciple and wanting to keep her by his side as a helper, she was naturally unhappy and snorted. I am very expensive. If you don't want me to be your disciple, and want me to serve your ladies, there is no way. The rules of the martial arts world are to calculate by day or by number of times. You can choose one. This was a reward. Su Buling had everything, not to mention money. He took the spoils sent by Xuechenzi from the side of the horse and handed it to Zhongli Jiju. This knife is priceless. Can you subscribe for a month? Subscribe for a month. Zhongli Jiju frowned slightly, took the precious knife and looked at it twice, nodded slightly. Today is the 23rd. By the 23rd of next month, you have to give me another 30,000 taels of silver. You have to pay for the herbs and expenses during this period. I will only provide my skills. Zhongli Chuchu felt embarrassed when she saw her master asking for a sky-high price, and said, Master, 1,000 taels a day, where do you get such a high price? You are not the top 10 martial arts champions. Zhongli Jiju really had nothing to say to this apprentice who was so stubborn, and glared slightly. You girl, if he doesn't invite me, we can just go back to Nanyu, but you have to stick to him. Zhongli Chuchu was speechless for a moment, and had no choice but to look at Su Buling with a little apology. Su Buling also felt that it was a bit expensive, and it was almost the price of the top courtesan in Chang'an City for a night, but Zhongli Juju was worth this price just for the dragon-locking goo she raised, so he didn't feel bad at the moment, and smiled. Okay, then Miss Juju will be mine this month. This sentence was obviously ambiguous. Zhongli Juju blinked his eyes, thought about it, and corrected it. I am your doctor. I can only help you treat diseases, make poisons, and recuperate. Fighting or other messy things will cost extra. No problem. Su Buling smiled heartily. In a good mood, he was about to ride his horse and whip it, but it involved the wound under his ribs and took a breath of cold air again. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 457. Jinhu County is located 50 miles south of Hongshan Lake. After the plundering of Hongshan Water Village, it has become the only stable place in this area. The county has organized militiamen to patrol day and night. Although the city is full of refugees with their families, there are still some singing and dancing in the inn and restaurant. Jianghu is always the fastest place to convey news. Maybe the water bandits who escaped from Hongshan Water Village saw the process. Before dawn, the whole city was already in an uproar. All the Jianghu people were talking about a thunderous news. Information. On the night of October 23, the unknown knight single-handedly destroyed Hongshan Lake, fought against Xuechenzi, and returned victorious. This news came from the mouth of the water bandits. Most Jianghu people still didn't believe that it was possible to turn Hongshan Lake upside down single-handedly. It was also possible to defeat Xuechenzi, the leader of Jiangnan, in a single fight. But destroying Hongshan Lake first and then Xuechenzi would be a little bit nonsense. This is simply not something humans can do. But just like what Xiao Xiang'er said back then, the vast territory of Yu is bound to be full of heroes. It is quite normal for such a large world to have a few proud men who are difficult to fathom with common sense. As Xuechenzi also arrived in Jinhu County in the early morning, he was treated for his injuries under the hospitality of local friends, and the news was officially confirmed. Xuechenzi has been in the world all his life, and he knew that sooner or later he would be beaten down by young people. Although this day came a bit suddenly, the news in the world could not be concealed at all. He generously admitted that he had taken advantage of his physical strength tonight and had not yet defeated Su. The facts about the prince. Xuechenzi personally admitted that his skills were inferior to others, which meant that the only Wu Kuei in Jiangnan had given up his position. The title of two heroes of iron and spear changed from Chen Chong and Xuechenzi to Chen Chong and Su Buling, and Dao Qingkui was also there. At this moment, he was officially promoted to Shai Wu Kai. Wu Kuei, who was under 20 years old, was something no one would dare to say, but he was definitely unprecedented. It is self-evident how amazing he was. As for why Xuechenzi fought with Prince Su, Xuechenzi definitely couldn't tell Prince Wu's arrangements. He just explained that he happened to meet him while passing by and contradicted Prince Su with his words. In this way, it can be regarded as sending Buddha to the West, lowering his profile to make Su Buling famous. Although Xuechenzi had King Wu's words as reassurance, the one he was fighting tonight was Prince Su after all. He gave up Wu Kuei's position neatly and at the same time created an upright image of Su Buling. It was also equivalent to an apology, lest Su Buling looking for trouble afterwards. After the news was confirmed, an uproar was instantly caused in Jinhu County, and spread at an alarming speed. I am afraid it will soon spread all over the world. There are different opinions on the reason why Su Buletinling appeared in Hongshan Lake. Some say that Prince Su cares about the people and saw the water bandits causing harm to the countryside and took action to eliminate violence. Others say that the eighth leader of the contemporary era, Zhongli Chuchu, was in trouble for the Hongshan Water Village, and Prince Su acted heroically to save the beauty, What else is there about Prince Su? The crown prince fell in love with Master Ba Kuei and wanted to sleep with him in his room. He was full of all kinds of gossip. When Su Buring arrived at Jinhu County a little later on his horse chasing the wind, there was already a lot of excitement in the wine shop and tea house. He was injured and didn't want to cause trouble for no reason at this time. He had no intention of explaining the random rumors. Anyway, they were all very similar. Zhongli Jiju was a little annoyed when she heard this, because the rumors in the world only had the names of Su Buling and Chu Chu, and she was not brought in as the instigator. The only thing that had any involvement was the big quilt. How could Zhongli Jiju endure it? And wanted to go to the inn where 3 religions and 9 streams gathered to speak clearly, but he was naturally stopped. Little Nightingale served as the archer for Su Buling to deal with the archers in the water village today. In fact, she contributed a lot. Otherwise, Su Buling would never dare to rush into the opponent's archers and serve as a target. It's a pity that the Jianghu people can't see what's hidden in the dark. The Nightingale living here naturally does not have her name. Nightingale didn't care about this. She was a maid, and she would naturally become famous when the young master became famous. She didn't care about this. The 4 of them arrived at the inn where the white camel was kept when it was getting light. Su Buling worked hard for half the night and ran a long distance. The pain and fatigue on his body swept over his body and mind. When he got inside, he lay down, and Nightingale ran to borrow the kitchen to make something. Eat to replenish energy. It was very cold in the winter morning. There was no heating facility in the inn room, and there were no other objects except the bed, table, and chairs. Zhongli Jiju closed the window and stood in front of the bed with one hand on her waist. She was a little tired after a long day of work, but the work was not finished yet, and she couldn't just rest like this after getting paid. Chu Chu, go get some hot water. Zhongli Chuchu nodded slightly and walked out of the room with the wooden basin. Zhongli Jiju leaned over the bed, took off her boots, and straightened Su Buling's body. Su Buling was very tired and did not fall asleep, but he did not want to move anymore. He just breathed a sigh of relief. Thanks. Why are you thanking me? I'm taking people's money and eliminating disasters for them. Sister, I've always done things with integrity. Zhongli Jiju sat down by the bed, dragged the stool over, took out a few small medicine bottles, and carefully prepared the medicine. The bed and the round stool were at the same height, so Zhongli Jiju had to lean over while sitting by the bed to toss the objects on the stool. Zhongli Jiju dared to compete with Ningyu. Her figure was very excessive. Her hips were wider than her shoulders. This posture made her skirt collapse tightly, drawing an arc like a full moon. It was quite large and full of tension, and seemed to be big ripe peaches. So round. Su Buling looked outwards. After seeing Zhongli Jiju's undefended back, he felt a little embarrassed. He looked away and looked upward, smiling. Miss Jiju, she is actually a very virtuous woman, not as weird as the rumors say. Zhongli Jiju poured several medicinal powders in a small porcelain bottle together, stirred them with water in a teacup, and responded with a lackluster response. You Central Plains people all require women to obey the 4 virtues, be virtuous and observe etiquette. Even the heroines in the arena must look like spotless white lotus flowers. Anyone who doesn't follow your rules will be accused of being a bad woman or a slut. I grew up in a village in South Vietnam. Many villages there are headed by women, so I am relatively gentle. When I was a child, I didn't like the hard life in the village. I heard that the gold in the Central Plains was the same as the place where the gods lived, so I left South Vietnam and ran here. At first, I wanted to be like women like Ning Yu and your mother, and be admired and favored wherever I go. The result was good. Those who were close to me were partly covetous of my beauty, and partly because I was from South Vietnam and I didn't speak and act properly, so they regarded me as a barbarian. I originally wanted to go to places like Yimei and Wudang to learn from my masters, the Master King Xiu, whom I met at that time, refused to accept me and even kicked me out in the end. I forgot about it. Humans, aren't they all trying to survive? You Central Plains people look down on me, so I have to fight for myself. What's wrong with that? I use poison to protect myself. No matter how few people I save, I can still save more people than Ning Yuhi, a white lotus who can't do anything, right? Why are you all turning towards her and treating me so unfairly? She's from a decent family, bah. They are just a group of hypocrites who look down on other people's origins. Zhongli Jiju was obviously a little annoyed when he mentioned old memories, and became unconvinced as he spoke. Su Buling listened quietly, shook his head and smiled. Zhongli Jiju is a bit naughty and is indeed incompatible with women in this world, but it is inappropriate to say that she is discriminated against by the Central Plains people. People in Jianghu are based on seniority and follow rules. They are grassroots people who do not have the background of a master family, and they are not able to overpower the crowd and speak with their fists. It is normal not to be taken seriously by others. Jianghu is not a good hall. Ning Yuhi is a person who almost became a queen, and people in the world will give her face more or less. If she has to compare, she will definitely feel that she is being treated badly. However, these words are meaningless. Zhongli Jiju's character is like this, and she has not done anything harmful to heaven and earth. She cannot be forced to change her evil ways and return to righteousness. Zhongli Jiju talked for a long time, and when Su Buling didn't respond, he snorted lightly. You are also from the Central Plains. Like them, you despise me in your heart. You are willing to worship Ning Yuhi as your teacher, but you refuse to worship me as your teacher to the death. Isn't it because you think that I, a poisonous South Vietnamese woman, am not worthy of your vassal king? The prince is only worthy of doing odd jobs under his subordinates. Su Buling spread his hands slightly. Miss Jiju, your words are so hurtful. How could I look down on your background? You can't believe what a man says. Anyway, I only look at the facts. I will only believe you when you honestly become my disciple. Zhongli Jiju took the prepared medicine, turned around and sat beside Su Buling, and raised her chin. Lie down, it hurts a little. Su Buletinling lay down honestly, exposing a few bruises on his chest. Zhongli Jiju dipped cotton in the potion and gently wiped the black spots on Su Buling's chest muscles. Her hair fell down and brushed against the skin on her chest. There were only two faint breathing sounds in the room. With the light fragrance lingering around him, Su Buling glanced at the beautiful face that was so close, then looked away, and then glanced again. Zhongli Jiju wiped the injured area carefully, and felt Su Buletinling's heart beating a little faster with her fingers. She slightly raised her eyelashes and took a look. Their eyes briefly looked at each other, then quickly looked away. Zhongli Jiju stopped moving his hand, looked down at himself, and then showed a touch of disdain in his eyes. Tch, with this determination, I can return it to Wu Kuei. After saying that, he stood up and threw the cotton in his hand to Su Buling. Wipe it yourself. Su Buletinling's expression was calm. Miss Jiju, I paid you money. Zhongli Jiju was not an inexperienced little girl, so she immediately rolled up her sleeves and gave Su Buling a few hard wipes. Fortunately, Zhongli Chuchu walked into the room with a wooden basin at this time. Seeing this, Zhongli Jiju was too lazy to argue with Su Buling, and turned around and walked out of the room. I'm tired. Let's go back to the room and rest first. Chu, please give him good medicine and rest early. Oh. Zhongli Chuchu held the wooden basin, closed the door with her feet, came to the bed and put down the hot water. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Zi. Chapter 458. The oil lamp was placed in the small wing. In the early morning, the world was silent, and there was no sound from inside or outside the window. Zhongli Chuchu returned to the inn. She had just taken off the red gauze covering the outside. The weather was very cold, and she was not as cold resistant as the master. She added a furry jacket on top, and still had a red oblique skirt underneath, showing a bit of a beauty from the western regions. A different flavor. Born outside Guan, Zhongli Chuchu's skin is very white, her green eyes are crystal clear under the light, her nose is high and her red lips are like fire. Even if she doesn't dress up deliberately, she still looks much brighter than the girl from the Central Plains. Suddenly they were alone with each other. Zhongli Chuchu was obviously a little cautious. He put the wooden basin on the stool beside the bed without looking at Su Buring. Maybe he felt that the room was too quiet, so he said softly, "Mr. Su, I'm really sorry for last night, Master and I were just playing around. I didn't expect you to come here and get hurt, I didn't mean to test you, but, I was just playing with Master." Su Buling held the quilt with his hands, leaned slightly against the head of the bed, and said with a smile, "I was going to find you, but I happened to meet Xuechenzi. It has nothing to do with you." Zhongli Chuchu picked up the medicine bowl and dipped it in cotton. Xuechenzi has been famous in the world for many years. I had only heard of such a magical figure before. I didn't expect to meet him last night, I didn't expect Mr. Su to beat him get down. You said he is a successful old martial artist. Why is he looking for a jade pendant? Is it possible that he wants to find it? Su Buling definitely didn't expect that Xuechenzi was summoned by the King of Wu. After all, Xuechenzi had nothing to do with the King of Wu. He could only guess at the moment. There are rumors in the world that he can live forever and become immortal. Xuechenzi is old and has reached the top. He probably wants to go one step further. Zhongli Chuchu had just emerged from the martial arts world not long ago. Like Manzi and King Yi, he actually didn't have much advanced knowledge. At this time, Su Buling wiped it with cotton. When he saw the muscle lines on the man's chest, he was a little afraid to touch it. He pretended to be calm and had nothing to say. Master Su's martial arts skills are so high, and he has already reached the peak at the age of 20. He should have some understanding of how to improve in the future. Is it possible to live forever and become immortal? Su Buling thought about this question seriously, shook his head and chuckled. The sky is high and the road is long. I should be the one exploring the path now. I must not have reached the peak yet. As for the ascension, maybe one day I will have an idea, shatter the void with my fist and go to practice immortality. Before this happens, who knows woolen cloth? Ah, Zhongli Chuchu really regarded Su Buling as a god. Hearing this, he couldn't help but worry. Mr. Su is the prince of the vassal. He has an unknown number of people under his command, and there are so many girls around him. He just ran away. It's so boring to seek immortality. Su Buling nodded, it's just a joke. There are no gods in the world. No matter how good your martial arts skills are, you are still afraid of kitchen knives. If the cook gives me 2 knives, he still has to beg me not to die. Puff. When Zhongli Chuchu heard this strange joke, she couldn't help but laugh out loud. She quickly covered her lips and put on a demure look common among Central Plains women. Zhongli Chuchu glanced at Su Buling, and put his hand to Su Buling's chest. The man's breath hit his face, and he felt weird in his heart. He used a lot of perseverance to force himself to come closer, but... Hiss. Su Buling took a breath and raised his hand. Miss Chuchu, your hand is a bit heavy. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Zhongli Chuchu was startled. She didn't dare to look into Su Buling's eyes. She just looked at the cotton in her hand and gently wiped the bruise. The movement was too gentle, which made it itchy. This girl. Su Bulenling really couldn't bear it, so he raised his hand to take the cotton, wiped it himself, and joked. Why is Miss Chuchu so nervous all of a sudden? I remember that you used to be quite cheerful. You must have fallen in love with me. I don't. Zhongli Chuchu was shocked and looked at Su Buling in a panic. Su, Mr. Su, don't be ridiculous. It's okay if you don't, why are you more coquettish than Manzi? Zhongli Chuchu pursed her lips, forced herself to calm down, made herself look calmer, and raised her hair beside her ears. Well, it's nothing, I'm just worried that Master Su will annoy me, I really want to be friends with him, just like King Yi and Manzi. He talks to them about everything, and they talk to him about everything, but I don't know why, the young master is relatively cold to me, and I don't know what I did wrong to make the young master dislike me. I know it's not good to ask you to return the favor, but there were other reasons at the time, so I just said it casually. What happened yesterday was because the young master didn't pay much attention to me, so he agreed to the master's plan. Speaking of this, Zhongli Chuchu's eyes showed a bit of sadness, and he sighed softly. Well, I do have some utilitarian interests. Unlike Manzi and the others, the young master is a great figure in the world. It seems inappropriate to be my close friend. Su Bulan sighed, opened his eyes and told lies. Who said I was cold to you? I didn't go to look for you at the Huainan ferry. I was with the young master of the Xiao family at that time, and he was notoriously petty. I like to complain to his aunt and don't dare to ignore him. I thought Miss Chu Chu could understand me. Zhongli Chuchu was stunned for a moment, then quickly shook his head. I understand the young master, Manzi told me this. I just thought about it. I haven't had any friends since I was a child, and I think the young master is a reliable person, so I'm afraid if the relationship between us is ruined, please don't blame me, sir. Don't think so much. Su Buling finished wiping the bruises on his chest, applied it with a hot towel, and said softly. I have to go to Hangzhou. You go to Huainan first and wait. I will be back in about 10 days. If there are no accidents, we will return to Suzhou together then. Isn't your hometown outside the customs? I will take you out of the customs then. Take a walk around and find the place where you lived when you were a child. When Zhongli Chuchu heard this, his eyes moved slightly, he hesitated for a moment, then pursed his lips and smiled. I took a trip outside the customs, but there was nothing to find. I grew up in South Vietnam. I actually really want to go to the village in South Vietnam with the young master. Although that place is a bit poorer, it is very beautiful. South Vietnam. Su Buring was helpless and pointed at himself. I am Su Lai's grandson. I was the culprit who drove South Vietnam into the ravines. Did you take me back to lure the wolf into the house, or did you want the leader of South Vietnam to kidnap the crown prince, to order the princes? Zhongli Chuchu naturally knew this and shook his head. South Vietnam is different from your central plains. Most of the villages are in charge. Our government is not very helpful. Whoever becomes the emperor is pretty much the same, but if you come over, you'd better not. She is a good leader of troops. If she destroys the master's stronghold, she has many tricks. Su Buring smiled softly. We'll talk about it when we have the chance, but if I go to South Vietnam, it's likely that the world will be in chaos and war will start. Otherwise, with my status, it won't be easy to run around. Young master, you don't need to take it seriously. I'm just talking casually. We're quite stable now. There's no point in fighting. While chatting, Nightingale prepared the meal and entered the room carrying a tray. Su Buletinling had been fighting for half the night and hadn't eaten yet. He was so hungry that his chest pressed against his back. He took it and started gobbling it down. Zhongli Chuchu pursed his lips, feeling that he had a lot to say. Standing in front of him, he couldn't even find a topic, so he didn't bother him anymore. He left the room with a plate of side dishes and 2 bowls of rice and went to the master's room. In the wing room. It was already early in the morning when I came back, and there were only 2 small rooms open. There was steaming water in the room, mixed with the sound of splashing water. Zhongli Juju paid great attention to her appearance. She felt a little uncomfortable after squatting in the barren mountains for a few days. She ran down to get some hot water. She also took out flower petals, homemade shower gel and other items, and washed them carefully in the fragrant wooden barrel. Zhongli Chuchu put down the food and felt a little uncomfortable, so she walked behind the screen, untied her dress, raised her legs and stepped into the barrel. He glanced at the master and saw that she was thinking about something. He just smiled at her and then moved his eyes to the red petals in the water. The wooden barrel was not big, so the two of them were still a little crowded. Zhongli Chuchu leaned in front of the master, raised his hand to stir up water, and helped wash the master's black hair, saying softly, "Master, what are you thinking about?" Zhongli Juju and his apprentice have been dependent on each other since they were young. They have long been accustomed to bathing together. They are still thinking about their own things and softly said, "Chu-Chu, what kind of person do you think Su Buling is? I used to think that he was an unworldly gentleman, very cold, but, now I find that there seems to be something wrong with him." Zhongli Chuchu frowned slightly. "Master Su is very good, he is gentle and elegant, has both political integrity and talent, and has no shortcomings at all." The only one who could tell the truth to Zhongli Juju was his disciple beside him. He turned around and said seriously, "There are many women around him and he looks a bit lecherous. Didn't you notice? Su Buletinling is lustful? Zhongli Chuchu is the current Bakuai. Before the new Bakuai came out, she was the most beautiful woman in the world. How can someone who ignores her be called lustful? Master, don't talk nonsense. He is the prince of a feudal lord. It is normal to have several concubines around him. It would be really strange if he didn't have any. He is different from those men who can't walk when they see women." The more Zhongli Juju heard, the more wrong she became. She had been taken advantage of by the eyes just now, and her legs were even padded. She glanced at her apprentice. "Chu-Chu, why do you always say nice things to him? Today you are going to ask me to detoxify him. I am your master. You didn't even hesitate at all and just pushed me onto his bed. Oops." When Zhongli Chuchu heard this, she immediately felt guilty. She turned Zhongli Juju over and rubbed her shoulders filially. I was anxious at the time and didn't think much about it. Who would have thought that young Master Su would also joke? Men are like this. You can't trust what they say. Don't act so eager in the future, or you may be deceived by others in a few words. Look at Ning Qingyi, she is as cold as an ice pick. Master, I just want to make friends with Mr. Su, I have no other thoughts. I just want to make friends, so you send me, my master, to a man's bed. Oh, my heart hurts. Master, I was wrong, I won't dare to do it again. Chirping, chirping, you come, and I go. While the master and apprentice were talking and laughing, the eastern sky gradually became brighter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 459. Time flies and it's afternoon. The streets are noisy and the room is quiet. Su Buling woke up from a deep sleep, opened his eyes and blinked, and quickly regained consciousness. After a good night's sleep and the healing medicine prepared by Zhongli Juju, the pain in his chest and waist was gone. The wounds under his ribs still stung a little, but it was nothing serious. Call. Su Buring breathed a sigh of relief and was about to lift off the thick quilt, but found that it was warm and smooth to the touch, and it seemed that someone was sleeping. Su Buling was stunned for a moment, lifted up the quilt and took a look, only to see Nightingale huddled next to him, wearing a goose-yellow belly band, lying on his side facing him, with his little hands on his chest, his long eyelashes slightly moving, breathing. He was still sleeping soundly, probably because his face was buried in the quilt and the air was blocked. His face was flushed and his skin was more supple than that of a baby. Su Buling thought about it carefully and then remembered that after eating in the early morning, he was too tired and fell down and lay down in a daze. We only booked 2 rooms, and Nightingale followed her around last night for a whole day, shooting, cooking, and boiling water. She was very tired. I didn't want her to sleep on the bench, so they made do with her for the night. Why did this girl take off all her clothes? Seeing that Nightingale hadn't woken up yet, Su Buling glanced at her subconsciously. Zaya, he just showed her sharp horns. The little girl, who is about to turn 16, has not yet fully grown her body. If you look closely, she is still a bit interesting, mainly because her face is so delicate. Su Buling looked at it for a moment, not wanting to wake up the Nightingale, so he covered himself with a quilt to prevent the cold air from coming in, and closed his eyes to concentrate on keeping his mind clear of distracting thoughts. Son. The movement of the quilt still woke up the cautious Nightingale. She moved drowsily in the quilt a few times, her head emerged from Su Buling's shoulder, and she glanced outside with sleepy eyes. Is this morning or afternoon? Afternoon. Oh. Nightingale rubbed her eyes. Seeing that Su Buling had no intention of getting up, she shrank back a little and muttered in a low voice. Young master was so powerful yesterday. I will be able to beat Wu Kuei to the ground like you anytime. Su Buling listened to the muffled voice and smiled softly. You have a good foundation. If you study hard, you will always reach the top. However, there are always higher mountains in the world. Don't be too eager and do your job well. That's enough. Nightingale hummed, thought for a while, maybe she was a little more awake, and then stretched out her face to lie on the pillow, looking at Su Buling's side face. Young master, there is nothing terrible about killing people. I am not complacent, I just think that young master is right, this is a very normal thing. Just understand. Su Buling is almost invincible in close combat, but like all martial arts masters, he will be involved in crossbows and will be incapacitated. Having a caring little encyclopedia by his side can save him a lot of trouble. He can train the little Nightingale, and he can also will deliberately avoid letting her see blood. However, Su Buling didn't like to treat the people around him as maids and servants. To him, everyone around him was a family member, and the same was true for Yunu and Xiaoyi. The main thing was to pay attention to the little girl's physical and mental health. Seeing that Nightingale was very sensible, Su Buling stopped chattering like an old woman. She closed her eyes again and focused on regulating her breath. However, the daughter's family, who was 15 or 16 years old, was just the beginning of her love affair. Nightingale was the first-in-law girl. From the day she followed Su Buling, she regarded herself as Su Buling's person. She was also well-read and intelligent, and when she saw Su Buling with a slightly strange expression, he asked seriously. Sir, do you miss Sister Xiang? Su Bulinling's expression froze, and he acted like a calm young man. Don't talk nonsense, what do you little girl know about adults' matters? Young master 19, just a few years older than me. The words shy and coy never existed in Nightingale's dictionary. She blinked her big eyes and suddenly took Su Buling's hand and placed it under her not-so-big belly band. Hiss dash. Su Buling frowned and turned his head to examine his little maid. What you do? Nightingale also frowned and felt carefully. Sister Xiang seems to be crazy every time, but actually, it's nothing. You have nothing. Su Buling took a breath, thought about it for a while, and simply hugged the slender Nightingale beside him and closed his eyes. Sleep honestly and don't think about all the messy things. Nightingale rubbed her cheek against Su Buling's arm, closed her eyes and listened for a moment. Master, your heart is beating a little fast. The book says it's because of evil thoughts. As far as you know, get up, get up. Su Buling was not losing why. He felt that the gun was about to go off, so he turned over. Nightingale was completely awake and no longer stayed in bed. She got up to find Su Buling a clean robe. Su Buling looked at Nightingale, who was only wearing a pair of underwear, walking around the room, and shook his head in amusement. Nightingale, I've told you a long time ago that girls should be shy. It's always the young master who teases the maid, but it's good for you that it's the other way around. Nightingale said oh, reluctantly blushed, and began to look for clothes in a coy and shy manner. Su Buletinling spread his hands and had nothing to say. The birthday banquet of King Wu is approaching, and Xiao Qi's ship is still waiting in Jinling. He cannot delay for too long and miss the time. At dusk, Su Buling left the inn and prepared to rush back to Jinling overnight. Since we were going to King Wu's birthday banquet and not traveling, it was difficult to predict what changes would occur. It was inappropriate to bring too many people with us, so we asked master and disciple Zhongli to go to Huainan and wait. The two teams parted outside Jinhu County. Zhongli Chuchu was wearing a red dress, sitting sideways on a tall white camel, holding the hump of the camel with his hands, watching Su Buling go away, with a little loss in his eyes. Ever since they said goodbye outside Suzhou City, Zhongli Chuchu had been thinking about the scene when they reunited. She even secretly practiced the tone and way of talking to Su Buling in front of the mirror in private, and her thoughts changed many times. But when we met again yesterday, she didn't say a word of what was in her heart. She hesitated and talked about irrelevant topics, and almost sent her master away. He said he wanted to be friends with Su Buling, but now they were friends. Zhongli Chuchu couldn't figure out why he became so useless. Anyway, he felt weird in his heart. Next to the white camel, Zhongli Juju hung a simple sword on his waist and sat sideways on the red horse with a smile on his brows. When the master and servants' backs gradually disappeared at the end of the official road, they withdrew their gaze. Chu-chu, let's go and be a guest at Xiao's house in Huainan. Zhongli Chuchu came back to his senses and drove a white camel beside his master. The camel was much taller than the horse. He looked down at Zhongli Juju and hesitated for a moment. Master, after you received Mr. Su's reward, you should follow Mr. Su, otherwise Mr. Su's reward would be in vain. Or you can postpone the time. Listening to his apprentice settling accounts with outsiders, Zhongli Juju showed a bit of helplessness on his face and sighed softly. I received his reward as a teacher, so naturally I followed his arrangements. It was him who asked me to go to Huainan and wait. It's not like I wanted to be lazy and take advantage. Instead of saying that others are stupid and rich in money, you talked about me instead. I didn't say anything about master. It's just that we are from the world and we can't take advantage of others, that's all. We just listen to his arrangements. However, Ningyu he is also in Huainan and Mr. Su is not here. Master suddenly ran over. Is it possible? Being beaten out. Zhongli Juju's eyes showed a bit of pride, and he raised his hand and patted the sword on his waist. Su Buling gave this to me personally. When the time comes, I will say that Su Buling has already worshipped me as his teacher. What if he does something to me? Su Buling will definitely be dissatisfied. Even if Ningyu he is angry, he won't dare to do anything to me. Ah! When Zhongli Chuchu heard this, he was a little frightened. Master, don't act recklessly. If young Master Su comes back and exposes your words, it will be so embarrassing, and he might even kick you out. Zhongli Juju didn't care at all. Kick him out, throw him out. Anyway, he asked me to do something, not me asking him to do something. Zhongli Chuchu pursed his lips and wanted to say something, but finally said softly oh. Zhongli Juju watched his apprentice grow up, and naturally felt the subtle changes in his expression. Seeing that Chu-Chu was a little unhappy, he shook his head and sighed softly. Chu-Chu, you can't do this. I've told you a long time ago that when you are in contact with men, you can't lower your body so low. Why do men like gentle and virtuous girls? Because it saves trouble and you don't have to worry about hitting or scolding or patting back. Your butt knows how to please a man. Master, What did you say? I'm talking about you. Look at what you look like now. You never stop saying Su Buletin Ling. You say good things to others about everything, for fear of mistreating them. I don't, I just want to make friends with Su Buling. I haven't had any friends since I was a child. Zhongli Jiju was helpless and nodded, even if you want to make friends, it's not your kind of way. When men treat women, they bully the weak and fear the strong. The more you tolerate and give in, the less thoughts the man will spend on you. I feel that you are not good at all anyway. I won't care. But for those women who can lose their temper, men will be more careful and considerate. For example, Mrs. Lu and Xiang around Su Buling have to think carefully when talking to them. Clearly, why? Because if they say something wrong, Mrs. Lu and Miss Xiang will definitely lose their temper and have to spend more time coaxing them. Look at you again. If they say they don't care, they won't care about you. They can just give you an explanation afterwards. I believe it without a doubt. Zhongli Chuchu was a little unconvinced. How can you give such an example? Mrs. Lu and that Xiang girl are members of Mr. Su's family. Mr. Su and I are friends, and the friendship between gentlemen is as light as water. Zhongli Jiju sighed, thought about it for a moment, and said softly. What I mean is, don't just think about saying nice things to Su Buling. If you want to make friends, you can start from other places. Su Buling has a few little girls around him. If you get along with them, you can become friends with each other. Su Buling will naturally treat you as a friend, and will think, if I neglect Miss Chu Chu, will Qingyi and the others be unhappy? Qingyi and the others will be unhappy, and they will have to coax them for a long time, so it is better not to neglect Miss Chu Chu. Zhongli Chuchu understood a little better after hearing this, and nodded thoughtfully. That seems to be the truth. Zhongli Jiju was then satisfied. He drove his horse onto the official road to Huainan and warned again. From now on, you must speak to me in front of Su Buling. As soon as I open my mouth, you will destroy it. Su Buling will enjoy the success. The result is that we, the master and the disciple, will be free. You should learn from Ning Qingyi and see what he does. Treat Su Buling. Master, I know I was wrong, and I will learn from Ning Qingyi. Well. The prince is very fierce. Author, Guan Guan Gong Zi. Chapter 460. Jade Emperor Mountain, Prince Wu's mansion. A black sky shrouded the west lake, and fishing fires flickered in and out of the wind and snow. The study room of the palace built near the lake is brightly lit, with the doors and windows closed and the stove burning, mixed with a faint smell of Chinese medicine. King Wusong Siming became angry in a rare move. He sat on the couch and reprimanded in a deep voice. I asked you to arrange for someone to change the jade pendant. Who asked Xuechenzi to go and fight Su Buling? He can't say polite words. Can we start a fight by lowering our posture and having a good chat? It doesn't matter if we fight, I haven't fought yet. Han Xianchu and Wang Ziyan stood about and exchanged glances with a bit of disbelief on their faces. They never expected that the only Wu Kuei in Jiangnan would be beaten to the ground by Su Buling. The purpose of letting Xuechenzi go over was to let Xuechenzi use his martial arts to coerce and induce him to exchange the jade pendant back. They didn't expect that Xuechenzi would really dare to hit Su Buling. Fortunately, he didn't, otherwise there would be no way to end it. In addition, Hongshan Water Village was secretly recruited by the palace a few months ago to accumulate available troops. If Su Buling had known that he would go to Hongshan Water Village to cause trouble, Xuechenzi should have appeared in advance to stop him. Even if he couldn't defeat him, he could save Hongshan Water Village. But it is obviously meaningless to say this now. Now that the water village has been burned and the jade pendant has not been replaced, it is obviously a failure. After King Wu finished getting angry, Han Xianchu stepped forward and explained. I didn't know beforehand that Su Buling would go to Hongshan Water Village, and Xuechenzi didn't know the background of Hongshan Water Village, otherwise he would have stopped him. As for the fight with Su Buling, Xuechenzi had a high status in the world and had a bad temper, and Su Buling had a bad temper. Yes, it was expected that a fight would break out over a disagreement. King Wu was too lazy to listen to this explanation, frowned and said coldly. Even Xuechenzi missed it, how can we get the jade back now? Wang Zuyan stroked his beard and thought for a moment, why don't you let Li Hanzhong send someone or try it himself? Han Zianshu gently raised his hand to stop him. Xuechenzi has already alerted the enemy. If he sends another military commander over, everyone will know that I am behind the plan. This is not advisable. Wang Zuyan thought about it. The only ones who could persuade Grandmaster Wu Kuei to go and grab the jade pendant were the feudal kings from all over the country. He thought about it. How about we get Su Buling drunk before the birthday banquet? Su Buling was in Chang'an. In order to resist the cold poison, he drank strong wine as water, but he couldn't get drunk. Is the honey trap possible? Beauty trap? Han Zianshu hesitated and looked at King Wu. King Wu rubbed his forehead, looked at the two counselors who had bad ideas, and said coldly. Su Buling, the dignified prince of the vassal, what kind of woman has he never seen before, and he still traps people? Do you think he is that idiot Song Yu? Wang Zuyan and Han Zianshu laughed together. They had no choice but to say whether they had these things or not. Advisors were not gods, and a clever woman could not make a meal without rice. She could not use force and had a background in the palace. How could she get the help of Crown Prince Su, who was skilled in martial arts? To seize the jade? Several people discussed for a while but had no idea, and King Wu had no choice but to raise his hand. That's all, don't act rashly again. We'll wait until Su Buletinling comes to Hangzhou. I will talk to him personally. Han Zianshu and Wang Zuyan breathed a sigh of relief and quickly bowed and retreated. 2 days later, the light snow that lasted for several days stopped. There was still singing and dancing in Jinling City. Without Yang Yingxiang, the local snake, it seemed that even the air was a little cleaner. People in the streets and alleys were talking about various rumors about Prince Su. In just a few days since he came to Jinling City, 3 major events that happened in succession, including killing Yang Yingxiang, destroying Hongshan Lake, and fighting Xuechenzi, have already pushed Su Buling's reputation to the top. There is a successor to the great General Su Lai and so on. Words kept coming out one after another, and the elderly people began to recall the prosperous years when Su Jiajin carved a bright future in troubled times. However, although killing bullies and destroying water bandits can inspire people, the impact of floods cannot be completely erased by killing a few people. After a snowfall, Jiangnan has entered an unprecedented cold winter. More and more refugees are suffering from hunger and cold. For the sake of public security, the government has banned the refugees from entering the city and has only built porridge sheds outside the city to provide relief. At dusk, Su Buling arrived at the gate of Jinling City on his horse chasing the wind. When he saw the refugees crowded in front of the porridge shed outside the city, he could only sigh softly. After all, this is not Suzhou. When the people suffer disasters, they can only rely on the king of Wu and the government. All he, the Prince of Su, can do is kill a few people who are causing harm to the people. After entering the city, Su Buling asked Nightingale to report to Xiaoqi that she was safe and ready to set off for Hangzhou, while he returned to the Lu family mansion on the south bank of Wenda Bridge. As soon as he walked near the alley, Su Buling saw the graceful Aunt Lu standing in a daze at the entrance of the alley. Her aqua skirt outlined her graceful figure. She had a shawl on her shoulders and a red hairpin in her long hair. Being dignified and gentle is very noble. But she may have stayed up late last night. At this time, Swinan's cheeks were a bit tired, her eyes were red, and her hands were folded on her waist and clasped tightly together. Su Buling straightened his clothes and made sure there was nothing unusual, then he showed a bright smile and led the horse to him. Aunt Lu. Lu Hongluan's whole body trembled slightly, and she turned around suddenly. The fatigue on her face disappeared and turned into anxiety and worry. She ran forward and raised her hand to touch Su Buling. "You damn boy, you went out to fight and kill again. You, the prince of a vassal, are trying to be a hero on your own, so you can't bring more people with you." As he spoke, he felt so aggrieved that he almost cried. Su Buling couldn't resist, but he still felt warm in his heart. He raised his hand and brushed the hair beside Lu Hongluan's ears. "Don't worry, Aunt Lu, I just went out for a walk." Lu Hongluan didn't avoid it either. He raised his hand and groped Su Buling's body, with a bit of anxiety still in his eyes. "Are you still lying to me? I already know it. There are rumors in the market that Prince Su entered Hongshan Lake alone and was hit by 9 knives and 28 arrows. When he went out, he met Xuechenzi, the military commander, and was hit 10 times in a row. 3 shots turned defeat into victory. 9 swords, 28 arrows, 13 spears." Su Buling's head was full of questions and he silently calculated, "I've been saved from over 50 attacks, so I'm really lucky. I can't believe the rumors in the world, I'm really fine." After Lu Hongluan realized that there were no holes all over her body, she felt a little more at ease. She sniffed Su Buling's chest and smelled a faint medicinal smell, so she wanted to untie Su Buling's robe. "Where is the injury? Is it serious? Let me see." Su Buling looked helpless and held Lu Hongluan's arm as he walked into the alley. "We'll talk about how to take off clothes outside when we get back." Lu Hongluan was worried about Su Buling's health, and quickly took Su Buling back to the Lu family without asking too much. There was a lot of commotion in Hongshan Lake. The elders of the Lu family came to offer condolences, but Lu Hongluan blocked them away. As if treating a dying wounded person, he asked Su Buling to lie down in the room, and called the doctor to look carefully and ask if there was anything wrong. "Internal injuries. The doctor is a famous doctor in Jinling City. He saw that Su Buling was slightly injured, but it was almost healed and he would be back to normal in a few days." After Mrs. Lu learned this, she felt a little relieved. Incense filled the room, and the maids were kicked out. Su Buling was forced to lean on the bed, with quilts on his back and a blanket on his legs, comforting him with a smile. "Aunt Lu, you told me I'm fine. They said it was okay, they were all injured." Mrs. Lu sat sideways in front of her, preventing Su Buling from getting up. She raised her hand to untie her white robe. When she saw the light bruises on Su Buling's chest and the bandages under his ribs, her heart tightened again, and she did not dare to shake Su Buling. After ordering, he touched it carefully a few times and said softly, "How long has it been? You forgot that you were almost dead when you were in Chang'an City. Prince Su handed you into my hands. If I knew something happened to you." Su Buling had no choice but to see that there was no one in the room, so he bravely took Lu Hongluan into his arms and patted her on the back. "Okay, don't make trouble, I know what's appropriate." "You." Mrs. Lu was caught off guard and fell directly onto Su Buling's chest, and immediately stopped nagging. I looked around and saw no one else, then secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He raised his hand and wanted to hit Su Buling a few times, but he was afraid of hurting Su Buling's injury. In the end, he did not struggle. He lay honestly in Su Buling's arms and complained, "Ling let me go, you are injured." Su Buling finally cleared his ears. How could he let go just like that? In order to distract Lu Hongluan, he raised his hand and started to untie the skirt, and said in a hurry, "Aunt Lu, you've been suffocating me to death these past few days." Lu Hongluan was a lady, but she had never heard such dirty words before. It came from her precious mouth. Looking down at Su Buling unbuttoning his clothes neatly, it took a long time to react. Imei frowned lightly and raised her hand to hit Su Buling on the shoulder. "Ling why are you like this? You look like, and the gangsters on the street. Being interrupted like this, Lu Hongluan forgot all the words he had been holding back for several days. His face gradually became hot. He held the corners of Peony's belly band to cover it up and looked at the door and window with a guilty conscience. His voice was so low that it was almost inaudible. When Su Buling saw this, he became bolder and said with a bit of a smile. "You are my aunt, what are you afraid of?" Ba dash. Lu Hongluan was already in embarrassment. He almost got angry when he heard this. He twisted his shoulders and tried to get up. Okay, I'm your aunt, you scum, don't touch me, I'll just die." Su Buletinling naturally refused to let go and wanted to continue teasing her aunt. The sound of footsteps and the voice of a nightingale came from outside the room. "Sir, the boat has been prepared for a long time. Miss Xiao asked whether you are leaving tomorrow or now." Mrs. Lu was startled when she heard the sound, and quickly closed her shirt with her hands and feet. Su Buling was a little unfinished and looked at Aunt Lu, who was adjusting her clothes. Lu Hongluan breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that Nightingale didn't come in. He didn't dare to stay with Su Buling anymore, and said softly, "It will take some time to get to Hangzhou. If we leave early, we can just spend a few days on the ship to recuperate. I'll go and talk to him, mother, please say goodbye." After saying that, he ran out in silence. "I have been arguing about the decoration downstairs for a day, and I feel that it is not in good condition. I will make some adjustments and there will be 2 chapters today. Thank you to Mr. Baxian Killer for the 10,000 reward. Thank you to Mr. Nine-Headed Bluebird for the 20,000 reward.